We're officially back live on Facebook as well. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome everyone and thank you for joining the Arts Respond to COVID-19 webinar. My name is Chapin and I assist with contracts, operations, and information technology at the IAC, and I will be helping with tech for the video call this afternoon. Just a few quick things. We have a packed schedule, and as you probably noticed, over 100 of you on this call. So to keep things running smoothly, I ask that you type your questions into the chat box, which means out of respect to our speakers, that you please remain on mute at all times. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat closely and along with my cohorts, my colleagues, and we'll be sure to ask your questions to our speakers following their presentations. Before we officially open the meeting, I want to invite you to share what your organization or you as an individual artist are doing to uplift your community. We've seen a lot of you engaging your audiences in different ways and invite you to share that with your peers in the chat box, both on the Zoom call and for those watching via Facebook Live. So thank you in advance for your responses, and please welcome our Executive Director, Louis Rickey.
Thank you so much, Chapin. Big thanks to Chapin for driving this bus and doing a great job at it. So I do want to welcome you today to this opportunity on behalf of our Governor, Eric Holcomb, on behalf of our commissioners from around the state, and also on behalf of our federal partner, the National Endowment for the Arts. I see that Andy Mathis is on the call with us. Thanks, Andy. Who works in the state and regional programs department of the NEA. So the Arts Commission is striving to present clear, concise, relevant, and timely information related to the arts and the ongoing public health crisis. So we're hosting this statewide call, not only to give you information, but to hear from you and give space for you to hear from each other. When you registered for the webinar, we invited you to share your questions. Thank you for doing this and letting us know what you're thinking and what you are needing. We'll be addressing some of those questions in the content provided today, in addition, as well as in additional webinars around specific topic areas and in the resource area on our website, in.gov/arts. This first webinar will mainly cover timely topics, including moving programming online, fundraising during this time, and dealing with the financial ramifications of the crisis, both for organizations as well as independent artists. A little bit later, I will also be covering how the IAC is adjusting some of our processes and requirements to help our grantees. Various project categories, as well as AOS 1, AOS 2, and AOS 3 during this time. So without further ado, let's dive right in. And to get us started today, JoEllen Rossebo is going to share with us how Arts for Learning took its programming online and a little bit about what fundraising on social media looks like for our organization. JoEllen is the president and CEO of Arts for Learning. Arts for Learning is based in Indianapolis, engages children with the arts statewide by bringing teaching artists into schools and community settings. Welcome, JoEllen.
Thank you, Louis. If you know our organization, then you know that we are statewide, although a lot of our work is done in the Indianapolis area. And the core of our work is to bring artists, live performances, workshops, and residencies to children wherever they are. So that could mean a preschool setting or the Marion County Jail or a county juvenile detention facility or a high school or just about anything. We go to where there are children. So this was quite an adaptive feat for us and probably a good one to be looking at innovation in the future. We really rely on reaching children in person, but we also see the real importance of being able to reach children wherever they are, and right now they're at home. And so we wanted to adapt to that. So we've done a couple of things, it really kind of in two phases. We also want to support our artists. Our teaching artists get paid when they do a program. And even that we've reached out to a lot of funders asking for flexibility with funding. But for the most part, it's been difficult because if our artists haven't completed a program, they don't have payment. So when we thought about this, we thought, well, let's start with some performing artists and get some really quick videos online so that we can break up the day for kids. I think the children right now are, they have their workbooks. If they're lucky enough to have a computer at home, they're looking at their computer, but we wanted them to have, we wanted to look at the social emotional aspect of learning too, and hit some of those competencies and think about breaking up their day with something creative and something fun. So last Friday we started on Facebook Live with 3 different artists. One played the accordion, another the drums, and then we had someone playing violin and singing, 3 of our performance artists. And then at the end, they all got together and sort of did their virtual jam. It was lighthearted, it was fun. I actually felt like dancing when I was watching them. The great thing about this was we were able to reach families. We chose Facebook Live because we thought if a child doesn't necessarily have a computer, there's a possibility they'd have a tablet or they could be looking at this on a parent's phone. So that was why we went with that. And now they're all available on our website. We're going to be producing 3 more coming up. And this Friday, we'll have 3 more live performances and then kind of a jam at the end. And things shifted so quickly for us. Last week, we were able to bring those artists into our office and film them right in our office. Now with shelter in place, we had to make new adaptations, and we're asking the artists to create these in their homes and send them to us. We'll review them, of course, before putting them on. And then, so it's a very different format already, and that just changed in a matter of a couple of days. So we're really excited about this because we're giving artists an opportunity to have some work, and we're reaching out to as many families as we can. We've also talked a lot about the fact that what about the kids that are not able to see this in a digital way? And so phase 2, and this will be primarily in the Indianapolis area, we are creating kits, creative kits. The kits will be distributed. We are working with Indianapolis Housing Agency and the Parks Department. We're trying to figure out some logistics of this with sanitation and the aspects of the virus and our care with that. But we hope to be distributing some creative kits to children that they can take home when they do their grab and go food packages. So we're going to experiment with that. But those programs will also we'll also ask the artists to do something that we could put online so that the children that do have the capability of seeing these projects online can see them there. So that's the gist of the program. I'd love to answer any questions you have about it. Along with this whole project, we do have an emergency fund campaign going on. We're hoping that as people watch the videos, they will donate so we can turn around and create more, get more of our artists online.
Well, thank you, JoEllen. Not a lot of specific questions yet, but I did just want to point out that if you haven't peeked at the chat, do notice all of the amazing things that your colleagues are doing right now. There's some incredible things happening in there.
I know we aren't alone in doing this. I just had a call with our national office, and I know all the affiliates are looking at adapting to this change and being able to provide for kids and families as they're isolated. And we are, I think so many people are being very generous with their time to make this kind of thing happen so that we can reach children. So we're sharing those ideas too, and what works best and what needs a little honing.
So JoEllen, this is Maya. I'm going to jump in and ask a question. You've mentioned a little bit that you were doing some fundraising associated with this, and we've had quite a few questions that have come in previous to the webinar asking about how organizations are thinking about fundraising right now. So maybe say a few words about how the team thought about fundraising during this time and how you're thinking about it, and maybe some tips that you might share with other organizations related to fundraising during this time.
Sure. You know, at first I was almost reticent. I thought, well, there are so many basic needs right now, although I think the arts are essential for so many reasons. But I was a little hesitant, thinking, well, one, there are lots of emergency fundraising initiatives right now, and we'd just be one more out there. And but then we just thought about the fact that as people see the videos and see that this is going to directly benefit the artists, the teaching artists, and the children, that we would give it a try. We aren't historically, we don't raise huge amounts of money through this kind of fundraising, but we have been seeing people come in with small gifts. They've enjoyed the videos and they've made a gift immediately. So we feel that as long as this helps us generate more and more of the Take 5 videos and hopefully more of the packets, we're going to continue the fund.
That's great. I got one more follow-up. How do you think this, talk a little bit about how you think this Take 5 and sort of what you're doing now is maybe changing the relationship with your audience or deepening the relationship with your audience and who you serve. So maybe say a few words about that if you would.
Yeah. Well, when I said earlier, historically, we believe in reaching children in live interactive performances, workshops, and residencies. We like to go where they are. And so, this seemed like a big change for us, but we have wanted to look at the possibilities of reaching children through technology and through and other platforms. And so we really think this is just the beginning for us, and we're going to become more and more sophisticated as to how we put these together, how we disseminate them. The Department of Education, Indiana Department of Education, and CDA are both going to be pushing this kind of thing out because they know that schools would like something a little different for kids. They want to break from their workbooks and their math and literacy programs. So we're keeping this very light. We're not making lots of standards connections with this. We're just trying to make it a fun part of the day.
So if you had to give some tips, or if you had some tips for an organization that hasn't done this before or done it yet, what would you say they should be thinking about?
Well, I'm always the kind of person that wants to put a lot of preparation into things and make sure that they're perfect before they go out. And I thought, well, do we have the capacity to do this well? We're not. And we just decided to do it and trust our teaching artists to do it. And they have been creative and fun. Some of them are more natural at it than others, but they all are really willing, and they're enjoying the process too. So I think that's a big part of it. Just try it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. Love starting this off with some inspiration. And as an accordion music player myself, I'm particularly touched that an accordionist was one of your first musicians. So anyway, so thanks so much for sharing your wisdom and expertise and your leap of faith experiences. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
As Louis mentioned, we've heard a lot of questions, obviously, related to finances, individual artists and organizations' financial situations. We recognize are serious and there is concern. And so we want to talk a little bit about your financial situations, how you can track losses, a little bit about what the pending legislation moving through Congress looks like. And so to talk a little bit about that right now, we are delighted to introduce Elaine Grogan Luttrull. Elaine's the founder of Minerva Financial Arts. She works to build financial literacy in creative individuals and organizations through education and coaching, and has worked with our Onramp program for early career artists for the past 3 years. We've invited to share her financial wisdom and some inspiration to help get you through this time. I'm going to hand it over to you, Elaine.
Thanks so much, Maya, and thank you everyone for having me here today. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces, and huge thanks to the Indian Arts Commission for putting this together. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. I have some visual resources that I hope will help guide this conversation. You will be getting a copy of these resources in your inbox from the Indian Arts Commission tomorrow. So don't panic. Don't feel like you have to capture every single word on every single slide. I'd encourage you to just kind of relax as we go through some of the major questions that have been coming up. And then you can review this information in more detail tomorrow and into the future. I do want to acknowledge that this information is changing very quickly. What I said on Monday in another webinar has already become outdated because of new movement from the Senate. So do know that this is an evolving situation, and lots of organizations are doing their best to bring you information in the most timely way possible, but be aware that this is changing very quickly. So basically what we're going to do is go through a few relevant updates that particularly matter to creative individuals and organizations, and answer some questions that you all submitted in advance. So the first thing I want to touch on is a conversation around the stimulus bill that's being discussed in Congress right now. This is federal aid through legislation. It's my understanding that a deal has been reached, and the Senate will be voting or has voted within the past few minutes to move this legislation forward. Of course, the Senate doesn't operate in isolation. It would still need to be reviewed by the House and then signed into law. But this is generally seen as good news, particularly because it includes about $2 trillion in support overall. It does extend unemployment benefits, both in dollar figures and in terms of the number of weeks covered. And it includes individual support to the tune of about $1,200 to individuals whose adjusted gross income from their 2018 tax return was less than $75,000. So if you have some time on your hands over the next couple days, maybe dust off your 2018 tax return and see what the number is on line 7, because that's going to become an important number as you move through the process of either requesting this aid or receiving it. This package also includes small business support, both in the form of loans and loan guarantees. Overall, this is pretty good news. It's exciting that this is moving forward. Get a hold of your 2018 tax return and then take some time as this legislation becomes finalized and eventually we hope gets passed into law to see what the individual provisions are. And again, just sit tight and be patient. Aid will likely be coming, but it's not going to be probably as much as many of you are used to earning through your creative pursuits. So it's also not going to come sort of immediately in your bank account tomorrow. So know that it's moving forward. Stay tuned for the details and be patient.
Elaine, I'm going to pop in for a quick second. I just want to make sure, are you intending to share slides with us? Right now we're seeing the whiteboard. Okay.
Yep, they will be part of the package that's emailed out to all of the participants tomorrow along with the recording of this.
Sorry, I mean, we can't view them on the screen.
You cannot view them on the screen.
We're seeing the whiteboard.
Thank you for
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But...
No, I'm so glad you did. How about now? Can you see them now?
Hey. Thank you, sorry.
Thank you. No, I apologize for that. So there were a couple of key points in here that you can look at tomorrow. Thanks for interrupting, Chapin. The next big question we've been getting is whether unemployment applies to individuals, particularly those who are self-employed. If you had a W-2 job and your hours have been cut or eliminated because of this, you definitely want to be visiting the Indiana Department of Workforce Development. The website is there, and there's also a great collection of frequently asked questions that may be helpful. For those of you that are self-employed, as a general rule, unemployment benefits do not extend to you if you are self-employed. However, the legislation that may have been recently passed by the Senate does include a new program called Pandemic Unemployment Assistance that is designed to extend to self-employed individuals as well. So definitely pay attention to this. This means that even if you are self-employed, you may have access to unemployment assistance through this new legislation. So that is a good thing to keep in mind. There's also a special program through FEMA that includes disaster unemployment assistance. This is a little bit different and yet similar. As a general rule, this is a federal program for those who are unemployed by a presidentially declared major disaster. And this program as well does generally extend to self-employed individuals. And there are a number of advocates nationwide encouraging this program to move forward. Referred here on the screen is a good starting point if you want to read more about this program or see if it might apply to you. There is a tool on the website that you can go through and answer some questions to see if you might be eligible for this. Be patient with all of these tools and resources. There are a whole lot of people reaching out for unemployment assistance right now, so the process is a little bit slower than it might normally be, but you can be patient and we can all move through this together. The key points here is if you had a W-2 job, unemployment is probably a good option for you, and the legislation included in the stimulus is expanding those benefits. There are also some other programs that apply to you if you are self-employed, which is a good thing. The next thing that people were talking about in these questions is about figuring out how to make more money as part of this process. I was heartened to see the Indiana community of artists supporting each other and sharing a little bit of humor. This was shared on social media by a participant from the Onramp program for emerging artists I mentioned. And I love the creativity and the optimism in reframing a situation into something positive. I think that's something we in the arts have a gift for doing. And I'm heartened to see all of the different examples of how individuals and organizations are moving their programming online. Many individuals were sharing those in the chat earlier when we started, and there are some fantastic ideas out there. So I'd encourage you to draw on your creativity and see what ways exist for you to continue to monetize what it is you do and serve the community in a really effective way. I'd also like to draw your attention to some opportunities to ask for support, whether that is through fundraising or through cultivating some support from your most ardent supporters, whether those are customers or donors or members or however you define those you serve. You've already laid the groundwork to be doing this through all of the work you've been doing with community engagement in Indiana. And this is why community matters. The idea that during hard times, we can reach out to the community, particularly those who might not be struggling as much as some others are struggling, and ask for support. Individual artists are doing this through Patreon or through emails to customers and their most ardent supporters, sometimes also potentially offering commissions or other one-time type of COVID-19 arts projects in response to this that many people who already love what you do are excited to get behind. For organizations, this could be outreach to your most devoted members, probably a targeted outreach that maybe ask them to accelerate their giving, that they might normally give closer to the end of the year. Perhaps they can give it now to help with some cash flow or make an additional contribution in acknowledgement of what is a very trying time right now. And it's also worth noting that part of the legislation seems to include changes to charitable giving, the tax deduction that comes with that might make that slightly more appealing, including for individuals that don't itemize their tax return. Again, this is new and evolving and not totally official yet because it hasn't been signed into law, but know that there might be some options there. In terms of thinking about curtailing expenses as much as possible, many of you are already very good at this. Often in the arts, we are remarkably creative at curtailing expenses as much as possible. There will be some natural expense reduction that occurs as part of this. And if you are an individual or an organization that is asking for flexibility on some of your expenses, whether that is a mortgage or a student loan payment or something else, definitely make sure you are documenting those conversations and asking for flexibility instead of assuming that it will just naturally happen. That way you can ensure that when things do get back to normal, your credit score will not be impacted by any non-payments you may have made. In terms of emergency support for artists, there's some national organizations that are doing fantastic work, both in gathering resources and then providing resources to individuals. I've listed a few of them here. Also, there are some fantastic resources in Indiana. Obviously, the Indiana Arts Commission is facilitating these conversations to provide support for you and for each other. The Arts Council of Indianapolis has launched an emergency grant program that could be an option for various individual artists. And they have included a campaign called Indie Keeps Creating, which again acknowledges the importance of the arts right now and always, and encourages support for each other. The Small Business Administration has extended some fairly favorable loan terms to small businesses and to nonprofits. I think it's important to note that these are loans and not grants, so they will need to be paid back at some point. So make sure you have a plan for paying those back, but this could be a great option if you're looking to replace a small amount of income or looking at your cash flow and realizing you might need a short-term source of money to continue to pay those expenses that you cannot reduce or eliminate. The latest terms I saw were that these loans were going up to about $25,000 at 3.75% for small businesses and 2.75% for nonprofits. You also may be noticing that many groups are asking you to quantify what the losses look like. Americans for the Arts has shared some data around this, as have other organizations. And it's important to sort of get a sense of what the financial impact is on individual artists and organizations. So to that end, I wanted to kind of organize or give you a tool to help you organize your thinking around three kind of big buckets that you can use to help capture the losses you may have experienced. And again, you will be getting a copy of this worksheet in your inbox tomorrow, and use it as a brainstorming resource. But also, if you are filling out a survey that's asking you for answers to very specific questions, answer those questions instead of using this resource, obviously. And when it comes to unemployment benefits or stimulus payments or emergency grants, the guidelines might be different than this. But I did want to offer this resource to help you think through what some of the losses might be so that you can start quantifying them. And the first bucket is known cancellations. These are things that you had confirmed, you were counting on income, and it is no longer happening because the event or the gig or the performance or the show has been canceled. There are some examples here. Obviously, if you're a musician and you were planning to perform for a flat fee and that's not happening, the amount of lost income is the flat fee you would have received. If the payment terms were a little bit more flexible, maybe you were splitting a door or collecting tips or gratuities, you can look back to previous experience to guesstimate to the best of your ability what that lost income would have been based on what it has been historically for you for similar types of events. There's a third example here for a teaching artist whose weekly workshop, for which they were paid $75, has been suspended. Calculating the loss there would be $75 times the number of weeks that it is suspended. So that's kind of the first category. And I would argue that's the easiest one to estimate. You knew there was an opportunity, it was confirmed, you had a pretty good idea of what you were going to earn from that opportunity. You can add up what those lost opportunities represent. The second category is a little bit fuzzier. These are opportunities where you may have normally earned something, but it's not guaranteed. So perhaps there's an arts festival that you normally participate in, and in previous years, you've earned some amount of money at similar types of festivals. That would represent this lost opportunity. It's a fuzzier number because there's no contract guaranteeing a particular amount that you would have earned, but it is important to kind of think through what these lost opportunities might represent. Another example here is a crafter who sells work online, and maybe this person knows that monthly they usually have between $1,000 and $1,400 worth of sales. This month they only have $150 worth of sales. So the lost opportunity there is the difference between what they would normally earn and what they have earned currently. The last example is of a dancer who was invited to participate in a showcase that could lead to future opportunities, but the showcase was canceled. In this case, it's a lost opportunity, but there's not necessarily dollars associated with it, right? It's unfortunate that the opportunity isn't happening, but it's hard to quantify the potential future work that could have resulted from that. So I'd encourage you not to include that in estimates of what you have lost revenue-wise. The third category has to do with sunk costs, economic turn for something that you have spent that you can't get back. An example of this might be someone who produced a whole lot of inventory for a very specific event that did not happen, right? In that case, this is the second example here for Crafter H. This person now has $800 worth of inventory or merchandise that is no longer usable. We would look at that as a sunk cost, and that's part of the consideration for the impact this is having on your creative business. In the first example here, the designer invested in a website redesign that was scheduled to launch. Maybe the launch didn't happen, or maybe it got postponed. This represents a sunk cost that may still be kind of recoverable, right? Because the website redesign can still be applicable when things normalize and settle down. And then the last example here is for a performer who had non-refundable airfare and lodging for a performance that got canceled. Obviously, if everything is non-refundable and the performer isn't able to recoup any of those costs, that would represent a sunk cost that would have an impact on them. So that's the big picture of the relevant updates addressing most of the questions that were submitted. If there are additional questions, Chapin or Jasmine, I would love to answer those right now.
Awesome. Yeah, we do have a few questions from both Facebook and Zoom. When you mentioned a W-2 job earlier, this is from Sarah on Facebook, does that have to be full-time? Since she thinks a lot of artists have a combination of a 1099 and a W-2 income.
Yes, generally speaking, it does. There are provisions currently that change state by state that have extended unemployment benefits to part-time workers as well who have been affected by this. So I'd encourage you to go through those frequently asked questions on the Indiana Department's website, so you can look to see what or whether your part-time W-2 job may enable you to qualify for some of those benefits. And stay tuned to the federal stimulus activity that may expand those unemployment benefits even further.
Awesome, thank you. From Kyle here on Zoom, with the sudden transfer of programming here to live streaming, it's left some organizations and artists scrambling to understand how copyright laws will affect the work they share. So do you have any resources in navigating these questions?
Yes, that's a fantastic question. I would encourage you, if you are an organization with a board of directors and attorney on the board, definitely get them to start paying attention to this. It's a great use for a legal skill set. I am not an attorney, but I can say it's my understanding that anything that is produced in fixed form is owned by the creator, which would include a recorded live stream or something that is offered in fixed form. So that is Elaine's non-legal perspective on what I understand is happening in terms of copyright law. I will say Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts is a fantastic national resource that offers great legal guidance. And in particular, the Arts and Business Council of Greater Boston has a pretty robust legal team led by Jim Grace that provides great questions. So you might want to poke around on their website and see if they have addressed this. It wouldn't surprise me if there are some questions they've been fielding with respect to this.
That's perfect. Thank you, Elaine.
Absolutely. Thank you. It really is going to be okay. You know, the artists and the arts in general are incredibly resilient. This is tough. It is going to be pretty tough for an extended period of time. But if I know anything about the creative population, it's that they are all going to be just fine. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks so much, Elaine. That was extremely helpful. I'm going to get my video back on here. Before we get into some other topics, I want to acknowledge the many grant recipients that are on this call today for the Arts Commission. So I've been watching the chat box, and I'd like to thank you, our grantees, for your leadership. The ways you're uplifting your communities and inspiring, and it's important. And I reiterate what Elaine said in that, you know, you are creative people, and you will be some of the leaders through this for our society, for our state. So thanks so much. You may have seen a few announcements related to grants in the past week and how the IAC is responding to situations and changes caused by the current situation and corresponding emergency measures. So first, let me address our grantees and our various project categories. Last week, we sent out an email to everyone receiving some type of project support from the IAC. This includes arts in the parks and historic sites, arts project support, cultural district engagement grants, individual advancement program, and the Onramp fellowship grants. In the email, we ask you to log into the online grant system and complete a short survey explaining what impact COVID-19 is going to have on your proposed project. If you haven't done that yet, please do so before March 31st. That's the end of the month. We are doing our best to be as flexible as possible with those grants, but we need to hear from you to make adjustments to your contracts. Those adjustments could be in time frame and many other ways. So we're going to do that on a case-by-case basis, but we can't do it unless you've logged in and let us know where your project sits. And if your project is already complete, fortunately in our state, we're coming in on our end of our fiscal year. So many of the projects are already complete. That's great. Go ahead and please submit your final grant report now. Let me now address our operating support grantees. This is AOS 1, AOS 2, and AOS 3. Yesterday, we sent out an announcement about Arts Organization Support 1 applicants for this upcoming fiscal year. And for those whose inbox is overflowing, here's the gist of it. AOS applicants that were approved last year, so who are currently receiving grants, will be pre-approved for this upcoming fiscal year. Again, AOS 1 applicants that were approved last year, which is this current year, will be pre-approved for the upcoming fiscal year. Funding amounts will be determined after the panel process is complete and the IAC's FY21 budget is finalized in late June, early July. New applicants to the AOS 1 category will still have their application reviewed by a panel of peers. So if you're a new applicant, there's still potential access to this program, but you will be reviewed the application that you have already submitted. It's our hope that going this route will create more bandwidth for our panelists who may not be used to paneling online and have much more complicated lives perhaps at the moment. We wanted to streamline it and also to give you some security as AOS 1 organizations and to alleviate some of that stress. We've already heard from a number of AOS 1 organizations, and thanks for letting us know that you appreciate it. We appreciate you, and we're glad that we were able to do this. As far as AOS 2 and AOS 3 organizations, this upcoming fiscal year is the second year of your contract. So as such, you did not reapply. Again, So there's nothing you need to do except submit your final grant report. Again, funding amounts will be determined for the second year of this biennium for FY21 budget, once our FY21 budget is finalized, which again will be in late June and early July. For all organizational grant recipients, we're looking into doing final payments early to create some cash flow relief. So these will be processed before your final grant report is due. You'll still need to submit a final grant report, and failure to do so could affect future funding eligibility. This is to help you with cash flow issues. Hopefully, having those payments sooner rather than later will help your operations. And you should be aware that our release of those funds has a number of other internal steps within state government, which we don't control, and many of which are now a bit overloaded. But us starting the payment process early will ultimately help the timing of those payments come to you earlier. We will communicate information and updates on additional steps that we're taking along the way. I will now open it to see if anyone has some questions for us. Chapin, you want
Yeah,
to
I was just,
for me?
yeah, I was peeking back. Perhaps you can answer this one. Lily on Zoom. She asked, how is aid going to be distributed for organizations, so not just individual artists?
I think Maya is going to talk a little bit about what's happening with organizations and the proposed legislation that's going through Congress. So that's coming up right away here. So hold on a moment and we'll be talking about that.
Cool. I think that's all for questions right now then.
Okay. Before we run out of time, we're going to go back to Maya, and as I said, she's going to tell you a little bit more of what's happening in terms of potential relief funding.
Great. Thanks, Louis. As Elaine mentioned earlier, the stimulus recovery bill is moving through Congress, and allocations for the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Institute of Museum and Library Services are now included in both the Senate and House deliberations. And in fact, I haven't been I've been checking my phone, but I haven't seen a ping yet that the bill has finally passed. But we feel good about the prospects. And funds identified would flow to the National Endowment for the Arts, obviously, as well as through state arts commissions like the Indiana Arts Commission, as well as regional arts agencies. So again, you'll be hearing from us related to opportunities for participation in the relief programs. A few things to keep in mind, like assuming that these relief programs look similar to the ones that were enacted after the Great Recession in 2009, 2010, and we anticipate they will look largely like those or have certainly a lot of similarities. These funds will most likely come with a waiver of match requirements. In other words, applicants won't need to match the funds that are provided. Again, assuming that it follows the contours of 2009. And as the funds identified in 2009 did, will most likely be need-based. So be on the lookout for us, from us for communications on the specific stimulus recovery funds when they become available. We don't know yet when that will be. Congress is moving quickly, or as quickly as can be, and then obviously our federal partner will need some time to put programs together and get information out to the field, which we will then share with you. But trust that a lot of statewide and national organizations are working on your behalf and committed to getting the information and the programs out there as soon as possible. So hang tight. As soon as we know something, we're going to share it with you. We also understand that there may likely be yet another stimulus package, which is another opportunity to request additional support for the arts. Once this current bill is finally negotiated and signed into law, work will begin on a new package. However, it's expected that Congress will take several weeks to work on an additional package, and they'll be using that time to gauge the state of the economy as part of informing that work. So, as we have said in previous communications with you, and we continue to reiterate, we encourage you please to visit the Americans for the Arts website and take the COVID-19 Impact Survey. Americans for the Arts is communicating with folks on the Hill, letting them know how arts organizations are being impacted. So please, if you've not taken that survey, which is americansforthearts.org, it's front and center on their homepage, you can't miss it. If you have put information in and your financial, your personal or your organizational financial situation is continuing to shift, please go back and complete the survey again, because Americans for the Arts is aggregating data from organizations and individuals. So it's not a one and done survey. They are looking to hear from organizations as well as artists about how their circumstances are changing as a result of this crisis. So please, if you filled it out and you have new information to share, please take the opportunity to visit the website and do that. Because again, Congress is going to be looking at how this crisis is affecting economic sectors across the country. And as we know, arts and culture is a critical economic sector in our country. Also, utilize the toolkit or the resource information that Elaine has shared with you related to tracking your expenses, because again, as we anticipate, this funding will be largely need-based, and you applicants will need to be able to document need, and having, while you're somewhat in the state of mind to do it, capturing those those sunk costs and lost revenue while it's happening is much easier to do than try to recreate something several weeks in the past or even months in the past. So, so visit Americans for the Arts, watch your inbox for information, and track your expenses. So I'm going to turn it back over to Bridget. Bridget, can you let everyone know what to expect from us in the coming days related to communications and so forth?
Sure. Thank you, Maya. So we will be sending out notes and the resources that Elaine has shared with us, in addition to a recording of this webinar tomorrow morning. So be on the lookout for that. And I want to just acknowledge that I know there were probably a lot of questions that did not get answered during this webinar. We are in the process of scheduling additional webinars based on the questions that you have asked. So please keep those questions coming. If you have something on your mind but you haven't reached out yet, please do. We want to hear what you're thinking. Artists, we're thinking about you, and that we know that you have a lot of questions. So we are planning a webinar specifically for you next week. It will be the same time and same day. So mark your calendar for Wednesday, April 1st from 3 to 4 p.m. An invitation to that webinar will be sent out in the follow-up communications as well. So be on the lookout for that. We're also planning a webinar for organizations next week to talk about employment issues that you guys are seeing. We've heard a lot of questions related to that, and so we want to get an expert on the line to answer some of those questions. We're still determining when that will be, but it will be next week. So, so stay tuned. All of that information will be coming in the follow-up. I wanted to go ahead and mention too, the IAC staff will stay on this call for another 15 minutes or so. So if anybody has any questions, please go ahead and post those in the chat box. Thinking specifically about your grant, now would be a great time for us to address those. Or we can take those on a one-by-one basis. Feel free to go ahead and email your program manager as well. I just want to thank Elaine and JoEllen for joining us today and being guest speakers. We really appreciated that. You guys have been so helpful. We will get through this together, you guys. So look for that follow-up and stay in touch with each other, continue supporting one another. Thank you.
Excellent. I do have a couple of questions since people are hanging around. Heather, who is one of our regional art partners, and she's here on Zoom, she was asking in regard to the AOS final payments, the potential of it coming early that Lewis had mentioned earlier, whether there's an approximate timeline for this decision to be officially announced. So if any of our folks know the answer to that.
Sure, we have this is Lewis. We've officially decided to do that. As far as timeline is concerned, again, I know that there was a planned, I think a planned call page with our regional partners to discuss this, but it is already something that we don't need to seek additional approval for. So we will do it as expediently as we can.
Perfect. An additional question, Claire, one of our grantees on Facebook, regarding the COVID-19 survey that we had given to current grantees. She was wondering if, let's say they've already completed it because their organization or her project wasn't affected greatly yet, that, if there's going to be an opportunity to do that again, or how should they communicate with the IAC if things change?
I'll take that if you don't mind.
Yeah, I can take that. So first of all, thank you for submitting that survey. We have about 332 project grantees out there. So one of the things that we really wanted to do is really first identify what the impact is and encourage folks that are completed with their project to go ahead and push through that final grant report. We're also working on a kind of a case-by-case basis to identify, what strategies is going to best meet the field. In those cases where it could be pushed out or into August, we'll be reaching out to those folks and let them know, try to reschedule if you can, and then reaching out to other folks if we need to think about extending, doing some sort of contract amendment if we need to, or other circumstances. We will be reaching out to you. Right now, we just need to identify what the actual impact is. And like I said, to identify what our best strategy is for moving forward to best serve all of you. Also gives us a little time to see about what the landscape's going to bring to us here in the near future. So we can also be mindful of how that's going to operate as well. So we'll reach out to you shortly. The deadline is March 31st. So then we'll get some of you I may go ahead and reach out to individually in advance of that, as some cases might be a little bit easier to solve than others.
Jasmine, did you see any other questions on Facebook that we should address? While she's taking a look, I do have a couple questions that were submitted for JoEllen as well. So JoEllen from Arts for Learning. When we're looking for ways to use online media to create a social connection, but also be able to continue delivering meaningful visual art education, what advice would you give for them?
I think JoEllen might have popped off the chat already, but just so everybody knows, Elaine and JoEllen have both given me permission to share their contact information with you. So I'll be including that in the follow-up communications, and please feel free to reach out to them as well.
I don't see any other questions at the moment.
We do have one coming in. Someone from Facebook, David from Facebook, has said, what is the likely early distribution of AOS 1 grants?
It kind of depends on where folks are if they're a regional arts partner or with IAC, if they're a direct grantee. We're talking to the regional arts partners tomorrow at 3 o'clock, and we are working to try to identify how quickly the funds can get out. The state has certainly got a lot of requests right now, so I think that's going to be factoring into how soon those funds get to you. Trust me, we want to get those funds to you, but other people in the state government want to get funds to their people too. So we might be duking it out with a few people to get that to you, but trust me, we're working hard. And as soon as we do find out, we will communicate that to our regional arts partners, who will then communicate that out to you.
And I want to,
also just to clarify, when we're talking about final payments, we're trying to get those out early before before your final reports are submitted. As far as the new grants in 21, which I think maybe this question referred to, all grants require action of the commission, which will next meet in the middle of June. And we will have to have an approved budget, both with the input of what's coming from the federal government, from the National Endowment for the Arts. Those would be regular funds to us from the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as any state issues around our 21 budget, which probably won't be settled till certainly the end of June. So those grant dollars are not available for the upcoming grants until after June 31st, till after July 1st, when the new fiscal year would begin. I hope that clarifies that.
I do want to bring up a question that somebody did ask, and that is, they asked, well, Tanya, how should organizations receiving arts project support proceed on final reporting if the shutdown has meant that they have had to reduce projects such as canceling exhibitions the grant money was going to fund? I want to be very clear that we're going to do our best to be as flexible as possible with each of these grants. We've talked about not requiring the match to occur so that the funds are there to support your work and looking at the scope of what the project is so we can be flexible with those funds as much as we can. So what we do know that when you do report in the end, they're not going to be robust participation figures. We get that, we understand that, and it's okay. It's okay, because you're facing reality, and we know what that reality is. So you just take it as you can.
Was that a question about also AOS grants too? Was that? Or no, just project grants?
Yeah, it's just about project grants, but thank you so much, because absolutely, arts organizations are going to be impacted substantially too. So we know that your participation figures are going to be reduced substantially. We may, just a heads up, we may ask some additional questions in the arts organization support final grants about the financial impact that you did experience so that we can get a pulse on that from the field. Thank you, Lois.
We also had a question come through on Facebook about Onramp 2020 and whether or not that will still be happening and any updates about that. So Anna, could you give us just a tease of what's likely to come out next week?
Of course. As you might imagine, Onramp 2020 has been significantly impacted by some of the limitations around gatherings and just the realities of what it means to travel and be together at this time. And so please stay tuned. We apologize for the lag in communications around this program as we're taking care of the most pressing issues first, but please stay tuned. And we are also hopefully soon going to be announcing some more ways that we can come alongside you as artists and support you even beyond that program. So stay tuned. We're here with you.
We also had a question come through from Allie on Facebook. Do early final grant payments apply to project support grants?
They do right now. If the project is complete, we're going to also talk to the partners about that tomorrow on getting them the funds to get that money out to the folks who have finished their projects. Right now, we're still, like I said, in that queue with the folks that do have outstanding projects to identify, what's the best route. Once we figure that out, and we get reports in, we'll do our best to get the funding out back to you as part of that final payment.
Okay, I think that's all we're seeing right now. So again, if we didn't get to your question, I apologize. And please follow up with either myself or your program manager, and we will be sure to get an answer to you as quickly as we can. thank you all again for joining us today, and look for that follow-up email. I hope to see a lot of you artists next week, same time, same place. Thanks, you guys.